Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Monday, February 9th, 2015 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. This is a special live edition of Admissions Live. I mean, we're always live, but this is like super live here today. I am your host, Chris Dorso, and my guest today is Chris Tanaka, who is the coordinator of LGBTQ services here at Stony Brook, and we are talking about admissions and the LGBTQ student. A little bit about what's happening this month on across the Higher Ed Live networks. This is Student Affairs Month, and so all of the February shows will talk a little bit about the link between what we do on the, within our individual channels, as well as sort of across the student affairs spectrum. And so if you don't think admissions is student affairs, it totally is, whether it's part of your student affairs division or not. Enrollment absolutely affects everybody, and what we do on the front end affects through the lifespan of your college student. And so we're all about busting silos on Higher Ed Live this month. So Admissions Live is, of course, part of the Higher Ed Live network. We offer live webcasts each week. For professionals in higher education, recorded shows and podcasts, always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com. Completely new and redesigned if you have not checked it out, and the podcast available on iTunes. The live broadcast allows viewers to share your knowledge and participate in discussions. So if you have questions for us along the way, hashtag HigherEdLive at HigherEdLive. And we will hopefully address any questions that come up over the course of the next half an hour or so. Today's show would not be possible without the support of my colleagues here at Stony Brook, as well as our producer, M. Stoner. M. Stoner is a marketing and communications firm that works with institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Admissions Live is also sponsored by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg released their social admissions report, which if you saw Nicole's show 2 weeks ago, she talked a great deal about what's happening with the social admissions report, and the Chegg folks at edu.chegg.com/insights have a great program there where you can look at the report and all of the analysis that they've done about what students are doing with social media and what institutions are doing from the enrollment perspective. There's always a lot of great data there. So thanks for our folks, our friends at Chegg, for putting that together. So welcome.
Hi.
So my guest, as I said, Chris Tanaka. Chris is a colleague of mine here, and the coordinator of LGBTQ services, an acronym that has gotten longer, longer over the years.
And it can still be longer.
And yes, it continues to get longer. That's true. So talk a little bit about your work, what you do here, and go from there, I guess.
Sure. So mostly what I do is split up into a couple of different areas. The first is sort of just educating the campus community about LGBTQ folks. For those who may not know LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, plus any other identities that may be sort of outside what is typically expected in terms of gender identity or sexual orientation. So
there's a lot of terminology that gets into it. You know, we do a great program here called the Safe Space Program, which is a training for professionals to assist and to help and to be a safe space for students. And, I went in there for my Safe Space training a couple years ago, and I thought I was like I had all the answers. There's a lot more to it than just sort of what the traditional LGBT perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important point. And to think about as we talk about all the things we're going to talk about over the next half an hour or so, that it's not just about gay and lesbian students. I'm using air quotes there, but so what sorts of services are schools offering now? There are some standard services, I guess. If they're not standard services, they should be standard services. And so what are schools doing that, or what's that may be more forward-thinking, more outside the box kinds of things that schools are doing?
Sure. So there are a few different areas. So the education is one piece of it, but there's also the advocacy piece, where not only advocating for individual students, but advocating for reviews of policies and things like that to make sure that what we're trying to do as an institution and our institutional values are actually reflected in the ways that our policies are written and the ways that we practice the work that we do. And then also things like student development, leadership development for LGBTQ students in particular. And then of course, you know, having programming and sort of support around creating social programming for community building within, you know, LGBTQ student communities. So with all of those things in mind, a lot of the sort of best practices and things that campuses are doing to make students feel most comfortable here, you know, it usually starts with the non-discrimination policy. That's a really important piece. Non-discrimination laws are very spotty around the country, and so it's really important for universities to explicitly include sexual orientation and gender identity and/or expression in their policies. A lot of folks are like, oh, well, there's sex in there, and so that counts for all of that too. Yes, you know, there are a lot of
that helps. That's important. Yes,
there are a lot of institutions that function from that perspective, but it's always really nice for a student to be able to see who they are spelled out in text, and I think that's really important to a lot of students. So even if, you know, by ways of things that you're doing, that's inclusive, it's always really nice to make sure that's in the policy as well. Another thing that is really important, particularly for trans and gender nonconforming students, is name and pronoun policies. So a lot of students go by a different name than what is on their legal documents, and having a place for them to put that name and have sort of the university systems draw that name in particular. A lot of this has come from students who've had to essentially out themselves to their instructors every semester, and say, you know, this name is on your roster, but this is what I go by, and then still sort of having that uncomfortable place where they don't know if the instructor is actually going to use that name or not. And so, and then I also mentioned pronouns. Having places where students can identify what pronouns they use. So do they use she, her, hers, or do they use he, him, his, or do they use they, them, theirs, or any variety of gender inclusive or gender neutral pronouns. You know, there's V and its congregations, Z, per. There are a lot of different pronouns that folks use, and there's a lot of information on the internet where that sort of helps you sort of conjugate those things and
Right.
practice using those things. But also, we can't, like, practicing and using them is sort of a second step to knowing that this is what the student uses. And so having places on forums where students can identify their pronoun is sort of that first step. And asking all students, not just students who you might think use a different pronoun, because, you know, what that says is I'm asking you because I think you look different.
Right.
And so again, you know, just having that question for all students. Student health insurance policies are really important. There are a lot of health insurance companies that explicitly exclude healthcare, transition-related healthcare for trans students. And so taking a look at your student health insurance policies and you know, making sure that that's something that is included explicitly. You know, that students have to jump through a lot of hoops, or everyone has, you know,
Right,
anybody
true,
who's, you know, trying to access trans healthcare is really jumping through a lot of hoops, and any ways that we can make policy help it not be so sort of acrobatic, I guess, would be, you know, really helpful for students. And again, so Chris mentioned that we do a safe space program. So safe space, safe zones, safer spaces, sort of this idea of creating environments where it may be safer than somewhere else, or people who may be safer than others. And then identity development workshops are sort of a lot of institutions that are just starting off providing educational services around LGBTQ identities start off in that sort of space, sort of a safe zone or ally training. In terms of housing, there are some institutions that do really great LGBTQ living learning housing situations. At Stony Brook, we do a gender inclusive housing. So students can request gender inclusive housing, and they're not asked about their gender. They're just, you know, they have to sign a community agreement saying that they understand that, you know, they need to be held accountable for their peers in the suite, and you know, make sure that they're understanding of what the community is intended for. And then, I mean, a lot of it is a lot of sort of the ideal thing that folks are looking for are these LGBTQ centers on campus that are sort of the hub of where a lot of LGBTQ education programming, support and resources, if are not centered there, are at least sort of a gateway to. You know, ultimately, serving LGBTQ students is about making sure that we see LGBTQ students as students, and that they're accessing every other service on campus, and ensuring that all the other services on campus are aware of how their identity within the LGBTQ communities may make their experience for that particular thing different. You know,
housing or anything along those lines, right?
So like the Career Center, we work really closely with the Career Center, and you know, what is the job search going to look for you? How do you dress? You know, who do you want to work for? What do you look for in a company? Do you want to be out? Do you not want to be out? Like there are a lot of considerations that come up in all, you know, across all different departments, and just making sure that everyone's sort of aware of the ways that somebody's gender or sexual orientation may sort of play a role in that.
So now I've got like a million questions now. So so you mentioned the inclusivity thing, which I think is so very important. We look, you know, on the admissions end, and we had this discussion a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the brochures and the kinds of things that we do. You know, we take great pains to make sure that we have proper demographic representation, ethnic representation across the brochures. We need to make sure we have African American students and Latino students. You asked the question, you know, do we show various, you know, do we show a gay couple? Do we show a lesbian couple in our brochures? Because students like to see themselves. We know that. We know that from every admission study, every focus group we've ever done. Students coming to, looking at campus brochures, they want to see themselves. They want to see that they're, you know, they'll have a home there. They'll have that space there, and that is a piece in the brochures. It's not just about, okay, yes, we have our token African American smiling person in the brochure, but making sure you've got real inclusivity, and it's not just to say, oh yes, we have gay people in the brochure, we're good. Check. It's not just about checking off the box.
Yeah, well, it also gets complicated too, right? Because, you know, these identities are identities that are largely invisible. So
also very
what does that look like in the brochure? You know, does it, you know, there's sort of a danger in playing into stereotypes when we're doing things like this. And so you have to be really intentional and really pay attention to the ways that, you know, these identities are represented, right? Because, you know, for all we know, there may be, you know, LGBTQ identified folks all over our brochures, and we just don't know.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. Right. That's true.
So how do we make that explicit but not sort of stereotypical? And you know, it's a delicate balance. It's hard.
And I think part of the challenge from an admissions perspective too, is that in high schools, I'm assuming it's got to be better now in 2015 than it was 20 years ago when I was in high school, with, you know, high school LGBT groups and sexual identity and all of that. but it's still a terribly confusing time for students who are teenagers who may be dealing with these kinds of pressures from friends, from parents, who may be looking for a more inclusive community than their parents may realize that they're looking for, if I'm phrasing that the right way.
Right.
And so, finding that balance between, what the students are asking and what they should be asking. From an admissions perspective, what should we be doing when we're standing behind the table? A student comes up to us and asks about LGBTQ services. What kinds of questions should we ask? What sorts of things should we know to help students find that fit better?
I think just really knowing what you have available on your campus and what you don't have available on your campus. A lot of students who identify, within LGBTQ identities have specific things that they're looking for in their campuses, and it's important to know, yes, we do have this, or no, we don't have this. And then when we have those no, we don't have this moments, like how do we get that? Because this is what students are looking for. I had a couple of students reach out over the summer who were interested in coming to Stony Brook, but they were unsure about housing. And I was like, great, we have gender inclusive housing. And then I ran into those students early this semester. They're like, Chris, I spoke to you over email. Yeah. This is me. That email exchange was why I came here. And so, that sort of is the validation, is that, we need to have these things available, and they'll sell themselves. Right. But we need to know about them. And so admissions counselors need to know about them and bring it to the table. And I would even say, you don't have to wait for the question to be asked. Have the information out. Say, right, these are things that we have on our campus, because if the student is not out to their parents, right, they could just say, like, I'm picking up everything. Right. Yeah. True. And keep going, and they'll have that information. They'll know about the services your campus has to offer, and they never have to have that exchange. Right. They may want to have that exchange, so definitely, Of course, right, yeah. But
should the question be on the application then? I mean, that's Duke made news this fall, being the first Common App school to ask it, and there are 6, according to Campus Pride, colleges plus the UC, the California 2-year system, that have a specific question of some kind, and in most cases it seems like more of a demographic kind of a question, whereas Duke, it comes across as more of a personal statement where you can express however you want to express it. Is that a question we should be asking in the admissions process?
So personally, I think yes. I think every opportunity that we can give a student to say who they are, we should take that opportunity. That being said, parents are often very involved in application processes. They may not check it, but they'll see it, and they'll see that the institution is interested in knowing who they are. And a lot of these questions come along with the underlying context of, we're asking because we want to provide you with services around this. And so just by asking the question, we'll give them, this thought, there's something here for me. Yeah. Even if they don't check yes, they've been identified, they've identified with us. Right, they know that this is a place that recognizes, right, and is welcoming, and just like having all the brochures on the table, that it's home there, or it can be home there, which is so important. And talking about sort of busting silos and things for students to be able to make that connection from our office in admissions to your office, to be able to not just ask us that question, because we may not have all the answers. Like I said, I went to the safe space training thinking I had all the answers. I did not have all the answers. And to be able to then transition onto the student affairs side to get the answers to that they need to the questions. A really interesting point that you made, though, about knowing what you don't have. And I think that's important as well. And it's not meant as a knock on campuses that don't have the same kinds of services as other campuses, but not to assume
or not to imply that you have services that are not offered.
Right.
Because I know that when we first used the gender neutral housing, gender inclusive housing, when that first, the news first broke here, my immediate reaction was, wow, that's fantastic. But I want to make sure this is really a thing, because I don't want to go out there and say, hey, yeah, we have this. And then it's like, oh, no, it's just in discussion, because you don't want to overpromise.
Right, exactly.
Like anything.
Exactly. There was something I was just thinking about. I think in terms of asking people to identify, you know, the admissions application is your first opportunity.
Right.
But I mean, we have students filling out forms hundreds of times across campus on 100 different forms.
True.
You know, health center forms and counseling center forms and, you know, advising, like academic advising forms, career counseling advising forms. So like, there are numerous opportunities for us to ask that question. I think they're particularly important when you're talking about mental health services and student health services, because those things actually have, you know, practical implications in terms of knowing the questions to ask and knowing, you know, different things that a person may be experiencing, you know, within their body or within sort of their mental health that that has a lot to do with. And so, you know, again, asking name, pronoun, and giving an opportunity for them to identify themselves. And understanding that those things change. College is a time where people are developing their identities and exploring and you know, learning about different identities, and oftentimes people are like, oh, well, this person came out this way and then they came out that way, so, you know, they changed. Maybe they just found better language that works better for them. And so it's not necessarily, or maybe they're just, you know, trying it out. And I think that's one of the things that we need to make space for, you know, in higher education settings, to allow students to come here and learn about themselves, just how they're learning about everything that they're studying. Right.
Yeah, I was going to make that analogy, but we do that academically, and we do that personally in other ways. Yeah. You know, and this is another and a crucial way that is you know, deeply tied into people's personal, a lot more important than what their major is going to be in most cases. So. You know, the news again this morning, you know, marriage equality and marriage equality is sort of one of those, it's a hot button issue that people can sort of get their hands on. And so people say, oh, it's like, oh, I know about gay rights because it's marriage equality. And when you're 18, 17 years old and you're looking at college, you're not thinking about marriage equality. You're thinking about, maybe that's, you know, 29th on your list of things that you're thinking about. What sorts of issues should campuses be thinking about that really kind of, again, sort of go beyond that? We talked a little bit about, you know, identity development and those kinds of things, but what other issues should we, you know, beyond that?
So, I mean, if we're talking about sort of more globally or even nationally, even if we constrain it to nationally, there is a lot of stuff going on nationally that impacts the LGBTQ community and people who identify as LGBTQ. Rates of youth homelessness are, you know, I think it's 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ in some way. You know, sexual violence statistics for LGBTQ or LGB communities are very high. Again, trans identities are not studied as much, but preliminary information says they're, again, heightened. Healthcare in general, being able to access healthcare as a trans person, being able to access healthcare as any LGBTQ identity, there are a lot of things that come into play in terms of health that you know, are important for us to be talking about. You know, non-discrimination laws, like I was saying before,
Right.
they're very spotty across the country. And so, you know, while it's great that folks are going and getting married, in some places that could make them lose their job or lose
Right.
their housing. And so, you know, it's important to sort of keep some perspective on all of the things that
Right.
are happening.
We're not always as enlightened as we say we are at first glance.
And there are a lot of other social identity things happening, right? We can't ignore the fact that there is a huge race issue happening right now across our country, and we also have to understand that there, like, LGBTQ people are across all different communities,
Also
and
true.
so all of these different identities, you know, any you know, pains or struggling that other communities are feeling, there are LGBTQ people in there also.
Right.
They can't be separated out.
Right.
And, you know, coming from Creating Change, which was in Denver,
right.
there was, you know, a young 16-year-old queer Latina who was shot and killed by the police in Denver. And, you know, I was at this conference that's about creating LGBT equality, creating change, right? And just the feeling at that conference was so heavy, because all of these issues are LGBTQ issues.
No, I tweeted out the link to Creating Change, the Creating Change conference, which, as you said, you just came back from, and so that was talk a little bit about that. Now, because you said there was a discussion of best practices, and
Yes.
you know, so what sort of things, what sort of takeaways in, you know, 2 minutes or less?
2 minutes or less.
Drum down a weeks of conference in
Okay.
2 minutes or less.
Okay, so one of the most important things for me as a higher education professional in going to Creating Change is where the consortium of LGBT higher education professionals meets.
Which is another link I want to get out, so I'm getting that out too.
The consortium is professionals from across the country that are doing LGBTQ work on campuses, and so they're also sort of an organization that does a lot of work around best practices. And one of the things that was happening was, you know, trying to figure out the best practices around asking that question on applications. So hopefully we'll be seeing that come out soon. And, you know, the consortium is just a really, really amazing resource for anybody thinking about sort of new programming or new policy or anything around serving LGBTQ students on college campuses.
Yeah, that's and we were sort of looking at that before the show, and it's lgbtcampus.org. And I just did send the link out. There's a search box there, and there's a ton of resources available for schools. You're not alone, and I know that's sort of a that's one of the things, and so campuses are not alone either. There are great things that schools are doing out there. There's great messaging that you know, that there are campuses that are putting out there, and policies and all that, and know that you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. That's why we have professional development, why we have conferences to see what other schools are doing.
Yeah, totally. The membership fees are really low too. That's one thing that they try to do, because they know there are a lot of campuses who might not have dedicated budgets for LGBTQ services. And so the membership costs are pretty low, and very low, I would say. And that gives you access to the whole network of all of these people doing this work, email listservs and online forums and things like that. So even if what's not on the website currently that you have access to is, you know, there's so much more to be gained from the consortium, and you know, the people who are a part of this consortium are so knowledgeable. You know, like you said earlier, that you still have a lot to learn. I feel when I'm with the consortium folks, I'm like, oh my gosh, teach me all of the new things.
Right, yeah.
Because they are really sort of the people who've been doing this a lot longer than I have, as well as new folks. So it's really important to be able to connect and to sort of be able to access these people who have so much knowledge and experience.
Great. And I know that the Campus Pride folks also do quite a bit, and I should probably send that link out too. So many links to send out, so many things. Campus Pride actually runs college fairs. And so that is campuspride.org, and I will pop that out as well for folks to and tweet. Boom. So again, resources, college fairs, resources for students, resources for families, resources for parents, and for higher ed folks as well. They do a Campus Pride Index.
Yes. So they actually, and this is a really good place to find out what best practices are, right. Because just through going through and answering the questions on the survey, you could see sort of what they're looking for, and you know, it's a really great way to assess your campus. So there's a website that posts the results of campus, the Campus Climate or Campus Pride Index. Right. But if you take the survey, you don't have to publish it. It's very much to help you know as an institution what you should be doing, and how to help you sort of envision what your next steps are.
Good. Well, we are running short on time, so I want to ask you any final thoughts about you know, how admissions offices can do more for the LGBTQ population. What should we be doing? Like, what should you know, an admissions person, an admissions director, admissions counselor, you know, something that we can today do to improve what we do?
I think the thing to do today would be reach out across your campus and find out what you have. Do sort of a survey of resources, get all that information in one place and make that available to prospective students. I think you know, that's really going to make a huge difference. And again, you know, having some sort of document, sort of if you're tabling at a fair, that students can just pick up, you know, discreetly, even if they're not asking you questions.
Great. Well, thanks to Chris Tanaka for joining me on the show today. We will be back next week. Admissions Live, we're off with the snow and all that. We'll be back again next week. Nicole Lentini. Thanks, as always, to M. Stoner and Chegg for sponsoring. And coming up tomorrow on Advancement Live, we have a guest host, Kim Brown, and Kim Brown will talk about the secret sauce to a 99% senior class giving campaign, which sounds impossible to me. And maybe that's just because we graduate like 4,000 people a year, and I can't imagine 99% of them giving, but we will get there because we're going to watch the show. So get reminders about this and other great shows by going to higheredlive.com, the newly redesigned higheredlive.com. Check out the podcasts on iTunes. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for following along. We'll see you all next week on Higher Ed Live.